International news. The US-led coalition conducts 15 airstrikes against Daesh targets in Syria and Iraq as the Iraqi army repels an attack by the terrorist gang to control an airbase in Anbar province. A day after a ceasefire deal is reached in Minsk, fierce fighting continues to grip eastern Ukraine. And in Geneva, almost 200 countries adopt a draft text as a basis for negotiations on a deal to fight climate change. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. The US-led coalition conducted 8 airstrikes against Daesh terrorists in Syria and 7 in Iraq since early yesterday. The combined joint task force leading the operations said in a statement released today that the strikes near Al-Raqqa, Kobani and Deir ez-Zor in Syria hit numerous armored vehicles used by the terrorist group, as well as 2 units of fighters, among other targets. In Iraq, the air raids near Al-Asad, Mosul and Sinjar hit 5 units of Daesh, 3 buildings, 3 fighting positions and other targets. Iraqi security forces repelled an attack by Daesh terrorists against an airbase in Anbar province where US Marines are training Iraqi troops. Iraqi and US military officials said militants from the terrorist group had attacked the Ain al-Assad base and the nearby town of al-Baghdadi a day earlier, leading to sporadic clashes in the town overnight. A US defense official said the Iraqi forces had stopped the attack and re-secured the facility. Iraq's defense ministry said the Iraqi army killed 8 terrorists near the base, which is about 85 kilometers northwest of Ramadi. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said the army was prioritizing the western Sunni province in its fight against Daesh. UN envoy for Syria Staffan de Mistura said that President Bashar al-Assad must be part of the solution for easing violence in Syria and that he would continue discussions with him after talks in Damascus earlier this week. The UN envoy is struggling to advance a proposal that would freeze fighting in the northern city of Aleppo, one of the subjects he had discussed with the president. In Vienna for talks with Austrian Foreign Minister Sebastian Kurz, de Mistura said the government still controlled a large part of Syria and that President Bashar al-Assad was part of the solution for the reduction of the violence, clarifying an earlier remark at a news conference that President Bashar al-Assad was part of the solution. In Egypt, a roadside bomb in Cairo killed police captain and wounded 8 other people. No one claimed responsibility for the bomb in the Cairo neighborhood of Ain Shams, which wounded 1 civilian and 7 police officers, plus the police captain who died of his injuries in hospital. Later, security sources said Egyptian warplanes killed 8 suspected militants in Sinai. It was not clear if the airstrikes were in retaliation for the blast. Security sources said warplanes struck the Sinai town of Rafah along Egypt's border with the Gaza Strip. Saudi Arabia has evacuated diplomatic staff from Yemen following the Houthi militia's seizure of power there, joining Western countries who have also closed embassies due to fears of worsening violence. The move reflected the hostility of Yemen's majority Sunni Muslim neighbors towards the Iranian-backed Houthis. Saudi Arabia's news agency cited an official at the foreign ministry that Riyadh has suspended all work at its embassy in Yemen and evacuated its staff due to the deterioration of the security and political situation. Germany and Italy also said they had closed their embassies in Yemen, following similar steps by Britain, France and the United States as the Houthis consolidated control after seizing the capital Sana'a. A German foreign ministry spokeswoman said Berlin had shut down its mission. Over to Turkey, a bomb rocked an area near a Turkish police checkpoint close to the Syrian border, wounding 3 people. The wounded, a police officer and 2 workers, were being treated in hospital for injuries. Sources said that explosives were placed under a car and detonated near the town of Suruc, some 15 kilometers north of the Syrian town of Kobani. Bomb disposal experts at the scene were investigating to determine the type of the explosives used in the attack. There were no immediate claims of responsibility for the bombing, but local media cited police sources as saying the bomber was a Russian citizen from Chechnya or Dagestan with links to the Daesh terrorist organization. Intense fighting has been reported in eastern Ukraine, a day after a peace deal was reached in Minsk. The fiercest battles were over control of the town of Debaltsev, a strategic town in between rebel-held areas. The group responsible for monitoring the ceasefire said there is still quite serious live fire in several areas. European leaders have warned Russia that it would face additional sanctions if the Minsk agreement was not respected. Here's more.
Ukraine and Russian-backed rebels fought fiercely across the east of the country, despite a new peace deal brokered by Germany and France. A Ukrainian military spokesman said 11 soldiers were killed and 40 wounded in the latest clashes. The chief of Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe said that although he cannot say Russian troops are present in eastern Ukraine, there are clearly fighters on the ground who came from Russia.
So I'm already concerned that we are seeing this morning continuation of hostilities.
Я вам скажу так, що я вже стурбований тим, що цього ранку ми засвідчили продовження вогню.
We really expect these hostilities to terminate at the deadline that was set in Minsk, and we would really hope to see a decrease already between now and that moment.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko said the country was still a long way from peace and that there were no guarantees a ceasefire deal agreed in Belarus would take effect.
I don't want anyone to have any illusions, and so I'm not seen as a naive person. We are still a very long way from peace. Nobody has a strong belief that the peace conditions which were signed in Minsk will be implemented strictly.
Kiev said pro-Russian rebels had built up their forces across separatist-held zones since the deal, and both sides accused each other of killing civilians. In the town of Chastia, 2 people were killed and 6 wounded when a shell hit a cafe. Luhansk also came under bombardment overnight, with Russian TV reporting some of the heaviest fighting there in months. The rebels accuse Ukrainian forces of shelling the separatist stronghold of Donetsk and the town of Horivka, where they said 3 children were killed. Under the Minsk agreement, the ceasefire is due to come into effect from Sunday. The ceasefire deal also envisages a withdrawal of the heavy weapons in the conflict that broke out almost a year ago. More than 5,400 people were killed since the conflict began, and more than 900,000 were displaced, with Ukraine. Loy Balkar for the news at 10.
At least 19 people were killed in the Pakistani city of Peshawar in a gun and bomb attack on a Shiite mosque, the latest sectarian violence to hit the country. Police said armed men broke into the mosque where people were attending Friday prayers and opened fire, following which 3 explosions were heard inside the building. The Pakistani Taliban claimed responsibility and said the attack was revenge for Pakistan's crackdown on militants following a December school massacre. The attack came as Pakistan tries to adopt new measures to tackle militants following the school massacre, in which 134 children were among the dead. Greece agreed to talk to its creditors to find a way out of its hated international bailout in a political climb-down that could prevent its new leftist-led government running out of money as early as next month. Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, attending his first European Union summit, agreed that Greek officials would meet representatives of the European Commission, the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The report has more.
Optimism on the streets of Athens. Opportunity for compromise, read one newspaper headline. Greece has agreed to talk to its creditors about a solution to its international bailout. The news could prevent the country's new leftist-led government running out of money as early as next month. It comes after Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras attended his first EU summit.
The transition of the existing bailout programme towards a new programme is the main subject of our negotiations and will be the main issue of the next Eurogroup meeting. The Greek delegation will take part in these meetings with crystal clear proposals.
But Eurogroup chief Jeroen Dijsselbloem was treading carefully about the prospects of a deal.
I am very cautious on the political side. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to take time, and don't get your hopes up yet.
The shift by Tsipras could mark a first step towards resolving the crisis, which has raised the risk of Greece being forced out of the euro. He won the election on a promise he'd scrap the €240 billion bailout and end cooperation with the Troika. Though he will be negotiating with the EU, ECB and IMF, Tsipras said the so-called Troika no longer existed. The ECB has thrown the country a further lifeline, though. It's approved an extra €5 billion in emergency funding for Greek banks. The clock is ticking for Greece. Finance ministers are due to meet again on Monday, but if there's no agreement within 2 weeks, it may not be eligible for a €7 billion bailout loan it desperately needs. NAB's Nick Parsons says the stakes are high.
One of the surprises throughout this has been actually the relatively small amount of capital flight from Greece. As long as there is freedom of capital, as long as there's freedom of movement across all the EU states, then unless you're being compensated for the risk in terms of extra rates of interest, then there is no sensible reason at all to hold money in a Greek bank.
The crisis in Ukraine was also on the agenda at the meeting. German Chancellor Angela Merkel made it clear that the EU may impose further sanctions on Russia if a ceasefire is not fully implemented. Fresh shelling has been reported in eastern Ukraine just a day after the peace deal was reached. The ceasefire is set to begin at midnight on Saturday.
Almost 200 countries agreed a draft text for a deal to fight climate change, but put off hard choices about narrowing down a vast range of options for limiting a damaging rise in temperatures. Government delegates adopted the 86-page Geneva draft as the basis for negotiations on the deal due to be agreed later this year. But the document includes radically varying proposals for slowing climate change. One foresees a phase out of net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, while another seeks a peak of emissions as soon as possible. Negotiators had to agree on an official text in Geneva to meet a UN requirement that it is in place 6 months before a summit in Paris starting in November 2015. Christiana Figueres, the head of the UN Climate Change Secretariat, said the long text would make the next negotiating session in June difficult.
The text has grown. We have a text today of 86 pages, which is more or less a doubling of what we had before. So yes, that makes June, which is the next time that they will get together, a little bit more difficult, but it does have the huge value that it is recognized as a formal negotiating text, and that all parties will be eager to engage with that text.
Real Madrid coach Carlo Ancelotti dismissed criticism of Cristiano Ronaldo and some of his teammates over the Portugal captain's 30th birthday party, which was held hours after last weekend's 4-0 La Liga drubbing by city rivals Atletico Madrid. Ronaldo and players including James Rodriguez, Pepe, Marcelo and Sami Khedira were condemned by some media and supporters after photographs from the festivities were leaked. Ancelotti said the players' professionalism could not be questioned, and he was confident that the La Liga leaders would soon return to top form, starting with tomorrow's game at home to Deportivo La Corona. The St. Louis Blues scored 3 times in just over 3 minutes to ease past the Tampa Bay Lightning 6-3 at Amalie Arena in Florida. Paul Shatsny scored in the middle period to open up a 5-1 lead. Vladimir Tarasenko added an empty netter in the final minutes to seal the victory for the visiting Blues. St. Louis improved to 76 points, while Tampa Bay fell to 74. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. Cold tonight in most areas with scattered showers forecast for the northern regions with south-westerly brisk winds. Snow is also expected across the northern highlands and a strong chance for freezing, especially across the southern highlands during the late night hours. Light rain is also forecast for much of the northern regions tomorrow, while it will remain cold elsewhere in the country. Winds will be south-westerly brisk. Aqaba should expect cool weather tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and slightly rough seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close, our top stories once again. The US-led coalition conducts 15 airstrikes against Daesh targets in Syria and Iraq as the Iraqi army repels an attack by the terrorist gang to control an airbase in Anbar province. A day after a ceasefire deal is reached in Minsk, fierce fighting continues to grip eastern Ukraine. And in Geneva, almost 200 countries adopt a draft text as a basis for negotiations on a deal to fight climate change. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Rad Liptouche. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.